Good evening, everyone, and welcome to SocialFlight Live. I'm Jeff Simon. We have such a wonderful show for you this evening. Caroline Blaze Jensen is here with us, and she is just a truly amazing, wonderful person, and I can't wait for you to meet her and hear about her story and so many things that are just inspirational to all of us out there. Before we get started, a couple things about what's going on in the world. We've been talking recently about some of the very, very cool events that were showing up in SocialFlight because it's such a great way to monitor what's happening in general aviation. And last week we talked about seeing pumpkin drops, which are, contests that have been happening at all these different places where I guess people are dropping small pumpkins out of their planes onto targets on the ground, just like a flower bomb drop. I am not aware of any pumpkin-induced damage that has occurred in any way, but the pumpkin drop season is now over, and now we're starting to see everything come Thanksgiving. And so turkey trots at airports. If you know of an event happening at an airport near you that is celebrating Thanksgiving in the season of autumn, please be sure to let us know. We'll make sure we get it on SocialFlight if it isn't already there. And of course, just go and check out socialflight.com and the free SocialFlight mobile apps for Apple and Android devices, and you will be able to see all of the events that are happening, both in person and online, like this evening. In addition to that, we have our Fly to Win Challenge, where we're giving away all sorts of prizes. We're choosing our winner today for our Lightspeed Zulu 3 headset, and then more gifts and prizes to come as we continue through this season. All you have to do is get the mobile app, go to an airport, check in. It's free, it's easy, and we're just here to support general aviation. In addition, our FAA learning system on socialflight.com makes it possible for you to go on and watch some videos and get wings credit with the FAA, or if you're a mechanic, you can get AMT credit or even your IA renewal hours. Just go and check out socialflight.com, and it's all there for you. Now, to get to tonight's guest, I am so excited about this. Caroline Blaze Jensen is a graduate of the United States Air Force Academy, a retired fighter pilot and veteran. She is a highly experienced leader, command pilot, instructor pilot, and evaluator. And during her time in the Air Force, she accumulated over 3,500 hours flying numerous aircraft, including the F-16 Fighting Falcon, as well as combat experience that includes flying missions in Operation Iraqi Freedom, supporting U.S. troops and our allies on the ground. Caroline was also the first female reserve officer to fly for the United States Air Force Air Demonstration Squadron, known as the Thunderbirds, and was the first woman qualified to fly in the Air Force's new jet trainer, the Boeing T-7A Red Hawk. I'm going to bring her on the line now. Please help me welcome to SocialFlight Live, Caroline Blaze Jensen. How are you doing, Caroline?
I'm great, Jeff. Thank you. And I'm sorry I missed out on the pumpkin drop. That sounded like fun.
I know. Usually you think about fragile things going there, but we first announced that when we had Mike Bush on the show, and his reaction was, is there going to be like a pumpkin strike? Like, is somebody, I could see like someone hitting the tail or something. Like, how big are these pumpkins people are dropping?
Yeah.
Have you ever been involved in any local GA airport activities with things like flower bomb dropping or candy drops or any of these other things?
Back at the Air Force Academy, when I was on the glider team, I never did this myself, of course, but the cadets would try to drop like tennis balls into the superintendent's pool out of a glider. A rumor anyway that they used to do that. So that's about the closest that I've gotten.
In theory, that's what happened.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can only imagine. There's so much to your story, and I'd like to set the kind of the baseline here by letting people know a little bit about who you are and where you came from. So you came from a family that really is rooted in military service and really dedication and patriotism to the country. Can you tell me a little bit about your background and how you kind of found your path towards flying and eventually into the academy?
Yeah, definitely. I'd love to. I grew up in Wisconsin. My dad is a Vietnam veteran and flew helicopters in the Marine Corps during Vietnam, and his father was in the Coast Guard on a Coast Guard cutter in the North Atlantic during World War II, and would tell stories about how he was on a boat, and they captured a submarine and riding these like huge waves. And he said if you could find that boat, you'd still see his handprint on the till of the rudder. But he actually got his orders to leave. My father was his first of 5 children, and he got his orders to leave like the day that my dad was born, and my dad was born on Christmas Eve. So imagine like leaving everything that you know and love and feel comfortable with a new kid to go and serve. And my grandpa was very proud of his service. And then on my mother's side, to my grandma on my mom's side, went and served in the Coast Guard, and she was a spar down in Florida, and she was always really proud of her service. So I grew up hearing about those stories and knowing that they had served, and wondering what it is that makes people want to leave their home and the comfort of their own home and go and serve their country. And they were just really big patriots, believe in our country, and they instilled in me the desire to want to serve something bigger than myself, and to really serve so that veterans like my grandparents and other veterans who had served before can rest peacefully knowing that there's someone there to take up where they left off.
Yeah.
So I started at a very young age. That's what I wanted to do. And then I really wanted to fly. I saw a movie when I was about 6 years old, and it was a biplane, and they were flying around in the clouds. And as a 6-year-old, I was like, can you get out and walk in the clouds? And like, what does it feel like? And what does it look like? And so I was just like really mesmerized with the idea of flying around clouds. And so I was really excited about that. My dad was in the Minnesota Air National Guard, and my parents divorced when I was 7. And when we'd go visit my dad, we'd see parachute, drops out of C-130s and cargo drops. And I was just really enamored with that whole kind of life and aviation and flying and serving at the same time. So I really wanted to do something where I could marry my passion for wanting to fly and serving my country, and the Air Force Academy was the perfect thing for me. So I worked very hard to get into the academy. I did not get the scores that I needed to on the ACTs the first time I took it, or the second or the third. So I actually took it 4 times so that I could meet the scores that I needed to be competitive to go to the academy. And I did get in. And so I had spent all this time wanting to be a pilot, and I was on the right track, and I got on the plane to fly out to Colorado Springs. And that was only the 4th time I'd ever been on an airplane. So
really? So
yeah.
That's fascinating. Now, I mean, wow. And so, first of all, I just want to go back and give proper credit that, I mean, the Coast Guard that we think of back, when you go back to the World War II, that as you said, that's a whole different, that's wartime footing.
Yes.
Submarines, really protecting the coast. I remember traveling and seeing monuments to it and some of the stories of what that meant for people that even we think of, Army, Navy, Air Force, but Coast Guard and Merchant Marines and things like that played an amazing role in World War II. And so you grew up with these stories of this service.
Yeah. My grandpa said he used to clear like the shells off of the deck when they'd shoot the guns, the big shells. He'd help clear those away. And the Coast Guard cutter he was on was called Dwayne, and they actually helped capture a submarine that had one of the 2 Enigma machines on it during World War II.
Really?
So
really,
yeah,
the Enigma machine that helped crack the code that the Nazis were using.
Yep.
That's pretty important.
And I learned about that after he passed away, but he didn't really talk about it. But yeah, and he always was a public servant too. After that, he loved baseball, and he ran a league in his community in Milwaukee area for kids, and just and my grandma too. Just I was always surrounded with this patriotism, and even my father, who had a completely different experience, coming home from Vietnam and the way that he was treated versus, World War II veterans, and still he served and still loves his country and still, encouraged me to follow my dream to do the same thing.
Wow. Now your father was a pilot as well, is that correct?
Yeah, he flew H-34s, and it was like not a dust-off pilot in Army, but the same types of missions in the Marine Corps in Vietnam.
Wow, that's got to be some like just an amazing experience and pretty challenging to say the least to be a helicopter pilot in Vietnam.
Yeah, absolutely. I think he flew over 600 hour or missions. Yeah,
Wow.
it was an insane amount of missions and air medals to go along with it. And his only requirement for me, if you can call it that, was he's like, I really want you to fly something higher and faster than a helicopter if you're going to be going to combat, because that was tough.
That makes a lot of sense. I'll tell you, I have immense amount of respect for the helicopter pilots that fly in combat, and especially during Vietnam, where they were at such risk. I remember I had a neighbor at one point that used to be a helicopter Huey pilot in Vietnam, and I asked him whether he had any interest in flying helicopters, now. And he basically said, once you've done that, it's like, no, I'm good.
Yeah. Check, next.
Yeah, that's right. Not going sideways through trees and not being shot at. So
yeah.
So do you remember when your first flight in an airplane was? Because you said fourth time when you went to the academy.
Yeah. Well, and my parents were teachers. Again, like that public, like serving the community. So there weren't a lot of funds, and there were 5 kids in my family. So my dad and my parents were divorced. So my mom and stepdad were teachers. My dad was a guardsman in Minnesota, and he gave me a ride in a 172 for my 15th birthday. So that was my first flight, 15 years old.
Did he know that that's exactly what you would want?
Yeah, see, because I'd since I was 6, I'd wanted to fly, and I think it was around 12 years old where I was really like started to dig into like I really want to go to the Air Force Academy. And so for my 15th birthday, I got that flight, and then later on, I went to camp at the Air Force Academy, and I like sold some of my stuff so that I could buy the ticket to fly out to Colorado Springs and go to the swim camp. So that was my second and third flight, and then the fourth flight was the one out there to basic training. And so this is kind of interesting too, to back up. So when I was 12 years old, it was well before women were allowed to fly in combat. And when I saw Top Gun, I didn't want to be Charlie. I wanted to be Maverick because that looked pretty cool. And so around 12 years old, and I'd seen the Thunderbirds fly, I went to my liaison officer for the Air Force Academy that was in my area, and he's like, well, there's 2 things. He's like, one, you're like way too early to start the admissions process to the Air Force Academy, and 2, they don't let women fly in combat, and you can't fly fighters. So I was a little bit crushed by that, and talked to my dad about it, and I was like, I don't know if this is a good goal for me. And he said, that's nonsense. And he told me about the WASP, the Women Air Force Service Pilots who flew during World War II. And he said they flew every airplane, they flew every mission that the men did except for combat. And it's your job, if this is your goal, to do everything that you can so that you are qualified and you're first in line when they change the laws. And sure enough, my senior year in high school, in April of 1993, the combat exclusion for women in fighter aircraft and in combat was lifted, and I graduated in 1994, and that's when I started the Air Force Academy. So I literally, like my day one stepping onto the academy, this goal and dream and vision that I had for myself was available. It was an option.
Did you sense like how momentous that was to be on the ground floor in the academy at a time when the goals had now changed and or the rules and the doors were open to combat?
Absolutely. I was my senior year in high school. I was writing a paper that everyone had to write, and it was, like you knew when you had this English class that you would have to write a paper about what you wanted to do after high school, like where you want to go to school and what kind of career you're looking for. And I'd been anticipating it, almost like little Ralphie writing about his Red Ryder BB gun And I knew cadets that were there, and I knew pilots, and I'd read all these, like everything I could get my hands on. I read the college handbook, like of all the courses that you could take at the academy. Like who even reads that, you know? And so I went through all of this, and I wrote my paper and I handed it in, and my teacher gave me an F on the paper. But the day I was writing the final draft of the paper, it was the night that the paper was due, the day after they had the press conference that lifted the combat exclusion. So I was literally writing out my final draft of the paper, because we didn't have, you know, computers in our homes back then. I was writing out the final draft, and the TV was on, and they came up with a news flash, and it was the Chief of Staff of the Air Force in the Pentagon press room with 3 women pilots standing behind him, announcing that women were now allowed to fly in fighters, and you know, these were the first 3 there. So then I went to school and I turned in my paper, and when I got my grade back, she gave me an F on it. Because she just didn't see a world where women should be maybe in combat, you know, and if they were, maybe they shouldn't be flying fighters. And so I talked to her a lot about it and showed her how serious I was and how much I had researched and put into this and thought about this paper, and she changed my grade from an F to a D. So
That's it.
I didn't feel it right. Yeah.
Oh my, that's I'm glad she made some concession on there,
Yeah.
but did you ever think about, you know, okay, I need to take that letter and attach it to maybe some Air Force stationery on letterhead and send it back to her?
I need to find it. It's probably somewhere.
Yeah, find that and do it and put it on with the signature of your headshot with the Thunderbirds.
Yeah. It all worked out, you know. I mean, and maybe that's good motivation, right? It's, you don't want to do things just to spite people, and I mean, sure as heck didn't do it because of her, but that's motivating too, right? And even when you're one of the first women, and you know, I think nowadays people are more accepting, but a lot of times in my career, I was the one and only, or maybe not one and only, but the very first woman that some of these men had ever been in a fighter squadron with. So it was a lot of pressure, you know, and it was still, you you just didn't have all the support that you wanted. So she wasn't probably the last person who didn't think that I belonged in a fighter cockpit, you know. But
Well,
that's no problem.
we'll get to it later on in the show, but obviously you do a lot to inspire people, to coach people, and to help people. And do you think that part of the formula, in addition to just, of course, being an amazing individual, a TUSAT success is the people that encourage you, but perhaps also the adversity that you sometimes face?
Yeah, I think the adversity is really the important part. I mean, succeeding is pretty easy, right? Even if you work really, really hard and you succeed, like that's a great thing, but it's more motivational and a more test of your mettle to
Mhm.
fail and continue. And how do you learn from that, right? And how do
Right.
you recover? How do you reset your goals if you need to? How do you stick to your goals? And how do you come out of it? You know, when we fly missions in the Air Force, especially the large force engagements where you're training a lot of people at the same time, like we look for objectives going into and then debrief it. And a lot of times we try to think about like 3 main things. There's a lot of things that can go wrong, but think about 3 things that you can take away from it to do better at next time. So I think that's, even if you do succeed, there's always varying levels of success and failure, right? It's not
Mhm.
always a binary. Success isn't always binary. So there's always ways that you can look to improve yourself
Right.
and to get better the next time that you go fly, or the next time that you know, have an issue with your child or your spouse or somebody at
Right.
work. So
Well, it seems like you know, if we're all trying to put together uh, the best that we can to motivate kids and to help everybody, you know, help people develop. And there's so much about mentorship and encouragement and opening all of these doors. I think there's something also to be said by what you're talking about now, which is the ability to be faced with obstacles and to be able to overcome them and to kind of within boundaries uh, deal with failure and then
yeah,
learn how to recover from it.
absolutely. And I think leading by example is one of the most, if not the most effective form of leadership, right?
Hmm.
So it's great to talk to people, and I do free mentoring for kids that want to go on to an aviation career in the military. And I'm happy to talk to anyone who wants to go to the Air Force Academy too. So I've given out a lot of my information. I have a website too, where they can contact me through that way. But it's really important to not only mentor, but just to be a good example on how you conduct yourself. And you can talk about stories about, I guess that's part of the examples, the things that I went through, but then still, like, what are you going to do next? And what's your next step looking ahead?
Right. Well, I think, one of the things I admire so much about you is that there there's so much that you've overcome to get to where you are and to achieve the goals that you have, that I think it brings it into reality for so many other people that you inspire. It's easy for people to be put on a pedestal and kind of looked at as heroes, where you don't see beyond the next level, and it seems like they succeeded at every single thing all the time and were always first in their class. And that that's a great role model, I guess, but it's intimidating and it's hard to identify with when things hit you as someone watching that and trying to use that as inspiration if you never see your heroes falter in any way. You've told me a little bit about some of the challenges you had at the academy. Can you tell everybody a little bit more about
Yeah.
that? Because I think that plays right into it.
Yeah, well, despite my D on my paper in high school, I was a straight A student. So, but I did work really hard for that. And I worked very hard to get to the Air Force Academy. There's a lot of things you need to do with the community, or if you want to, choose to work through your church. And I was the captain of my swim team for 3 years in high school and track. And I did everything that I needed to do to prepare myself to be admitted and to succeed at the academy. My first year at the Air Force Academy was brutal. Like, you're sleep deprived. I mean, they really break you down to build you back up. And that's kind of what basic training is in the military. And they want to build you back up as a team and show you how much you can handle and how strong you are. So there was a lot of that at the Air Force Academy, and then just a very heavy academic load. And it's one of the greatest engineering schools in the country, if not, I'm sure it's ranked within the globe as well. I am not a STEM person. I think it's very important. I ended up majoring in English, and I got a Bachelor of Science in English, which is pretty rare. But my first semester with this
That's
huge
impressive.
course load, yeah, this huge course load of all of these technical courses, it was really really difficult, and I didn't fail anything, but I came close, and I really had to juggle things and make sure that I prioritized what was the most important thing to study for, and at the expense of other things. And at the end of my first freshman year, I got my grades back, passed everything. I had a 2.2 grade point average. At the end of the academic year, we all have to kind of move around to make room for the basic cadets to come in. And so I had to move from one dormitory across to the other dormitory. And I was walking out on the campus there. We call it the Trotso at the Air Force Academy. And I was like right in front of that big, beautiful chapel that people have seen. The mountains are in the background. I don't see any of that because I am like Charlie Brown, moping, head down, dragging this cart behind me that had all of my worldly possessions, which was about like 3 Tupperware tubs full of stuff, to my summer dorm room, and just feeling sorry for myself and really thinking, like, why did I work so hard to do this? Like, I gave it 200% my freshman year, and I got a 2.2 grade point average, and I have 3 more years to go. And granted, your freshman year is really the most difficult, but just, I was really, really down on myself. Like, I worked really hard to be in this position, and this is like one of the most difficult things I've ever done in my life. And as I was feeling sorry for myself, I was startled. There was this whoosh, this whooshing sound going by, scared the heck out of me. And I look up, and like goosebumps over my whole body. There was a Thunderbird. It was, right, we're getting ready for graduation week. The Thunderbirds were in town. and the Thunderbirds were flying, and there was one aircraft flying between the mountains and the front range, like from my perspective where I looked up, and I was like, man, like that's it, right? Like, because I am here, even if with my 2.2 grade point average, I have the opportunity to go fly a fighter someday. And so it really reinvigorated me. And then in 2012, one of my favorite sorties or flights I've ever flown in an airplane, we went to the Air Force Academy for graduation my first year on the Thunderbirds. And partway through, like the wingmen hold high, I was number 3, the right wing, and we were holding up high. And when we dropped down, we were running our low bombers lines. And guess who was flying between the chapel and the mountains, right? It was me. And I was like, oh my goodness, I can't, believe it. And just think if I'd given up that I never would have been there. And then also think about how many cadets are moping across the terrazzo right now and need that inspiration. So it was really great. And you never know where you're going to end up if you just like stick with your goals. Like, I was right. And I was doubting myself that I set that goal for myself, but I stuck to it, and I took that failure and I embraced it, and I majored in English, and I succeeded. And by the end, I was on the dean's list.
Oh my God, that is so wonderful, and what a great story. And the idea, like you said, that you literally switched places and may have been the one inspiring someone else or giving them encouragement not to give up.
That's right. I hope so.
I'm sure
there was at least one.
There is no question that there's just a reason there's a grading scale there. There's got to be someone who was walking across the terrazzo not feeling so good about themselves at that moment.
Yeah.
So you made it through the academy. What happened? Where were you after the academy?
After I went to the Air Force Academy, I went to Del Rio, Texas for pilot training. I actually ended up staying at the Air Force Academy for almost a year because I was flying the T3, the Slingsby T3 Firefly. We had 3 fatalities, unfortunately. Actually 6 fatalities, 3 crashes. There were 3 cadets, one from the class of 96, 97, and my class of 98 that perished flying that aircraft, and they shut down the program the summer that I was in it. And I was literally sitting in the airplane when a cadet came running out and said, General Fig Newton says we're done, and they canceled the program. Since I had no flying experience prior, I ended up staying at the Air Force Academy, and I got to teach a bunch of officers who came in how to fly gliders. And so that was a pseudo first assignment, but then I went to pilot training in Del Rio, Texas. And my first assignment graduating from pilot training was as a T-38 instructor pilot, first assignment instructor pilot.
Wow.
Which I loved. It's a really difficult aircraft to fly, but it was my first plane. So my first real aircraft.
That must have been very difficult. I know that the Slingsby had vapor lock issues?
Yeah, there were, and I can't recall everything right now, but I think there was, it did have vapor lock issues. I believe like the last one, and the day that we shut down, if you pulled the throttle back to idle, the prop kept windmilling, and it didn't sound any different if it was cut off or if it was just windmilling and idle. And so there were incidents where people were setting up for a simulated engine out landing, and then when they would push the throttle up, there was no thrust because the engine had locked out. So, and I believe one of them was like a traffic pattern incident too, but it's been a while since I had looked at those mishaps, but it was really sad.
Yeah.
The first one was a good friend of the cadet who lived next door to me. The second one, I had just moved to a new squadron, and this cadet had been in the squadron with these people. And so I watched them learn about their friend who had just passed away. So that was, your heart goes out to those people. And then the last one was a classmate of mine too. And
wow.
So it's just, and that kind of sets the tone too. It's like aviation, and especially in combat aviation, those things happen. And, they say everybody dies, but not everybody lives. And I believe that they were living and doing something that they really loved when those things happened to them. And I think that's why we do what we do, right? Even though there's some inherent danger in aviation.
Yeah. I like that saying. I hadn't heard that before. Everybody dies, but not everybody lives. That's very interesting. You mentioned about flying gliders. That's a big thing in the academy, and that was your first thing. Can you tell me a little bit about that?
Yeah. think I ended up with like 110 hours, and it was like a point two at a time. Because we did a SOAR for All program. So after your freshman year, you could elect to take the SOAR for All program. And I, luckily, even though I did horribly at academics, I was a natural when it came to flying. So this goal that I had and was like, luckily I was pretty good at it. And I got selected to be a glider instructor there. So we did an upgrade program over the first semester, and then we got to teach other cadets, and they'd bring in ROTC cadets too from other schools and get to, you know, learn from a lot of other people. And it was a great group of folks, and it's awesome to see all the soaring friends that I had and people that I knew back at the academy go on to do like really wonderful things later on in life. But it was amazing, wonderful foundation to build my own personal aviation skills on, and just get that air sense. So I think it's a great way for people who want to go out and fly, and it's a little less expensive than powered flight, and it's a great way to really like learn something. And there's so much, it's serene and it's calm, and I do remember my first flight. We did like a aggravated stall, and it scared the heck out of me, but it was so exhilarating at the same time. I like couldn't wait to go out and fly again.
I have heard, you know, people who are very experienced glider pilots and powered aircraft pilots say that they believe every pilot should have glider time. Is that how you feel?
Yeah, I mean, energy management and really like running through, if you have a certain number of events that need to be accomplished on your flight in order to, you know, check everything off that you need to get all the experiences you need to working towards licenses or whatnot. You have, and we didn't do any thermaling there, so it was really, you really just manage your energy, and you really had to keep an eye on where you were going to land and what you had next, and just running through that whole mission, the lineup of the events that you needed to accomplish to then get back, and then assessing the winds constantly and how, or if they were changing, to make sure that you landed on the field where you were supposed to be. And that can be tricky. Weather changes really fast in the Front Range in Colorado. So
yeah, I can only imagine.
Keep an eye on it.
So tell me about your aircraft progression. What got you, you know, all the way to the F-16?
So I flew the T-37 Tweet in Del Rio, Texas, and then I went on to the T-38. And that's my first plane that I was an instructor pilot in. I came right back and did that. Then
so the Tweet's the Cessna that's like basically loud as possible.
Yeah, like people who like they lose hearing in the ear if you flew too many hours in it. They had some hearing damage.
And the Talon, the T-38, that's the Talon, is that correct?
Yes, the T-38 Talon. It's a
That's what we see on, like, used to be that every single airplane, anytime there was like a movie with a low budget, they like where they were going to show fighters and everything else, was always a Talon.
Yeah, well, you know what? Like, I did a couple air shows before the Thunderbirds, and you know, as a static display, and people are like, "Oh, I love this plane. It's so sleek looking, the beautiful thin wings, and like the Coke bottle fuselage, and so it looks like a little fighter, but it's very, I mean, you have to be on your toes all the time. It won't let you rest, and it's pretty underpowered, especially at high altitude and higher temperatures, and so it really makes you pay attention. And I love the airplane, but it'll talk to you too. If there's certain times, there's a lot of buffet on the airplane when you're flying around the pattern for quite a bit of it, and yeah, I loved it. It's a great plane, and it looks cool. So people who don't know airplanes don't know any better.
Oh, it really does look cool with those little. It is one. It's a sexy plane. There's no question about it. But that's interesting about what you're saying about what it was like to actually fly the T-38, because I hadn't heard that it was fairly challenging and a really good trainer.
Yeah, well, I think, you know, there were quite a few incidents and accidents with it when it first came out, and it's been in service for over, I think it's like over 60 years now. But they had problems with, it could get, like I said, below the below speed on final. They ended up adding like AOA indexer lights to help make people aware of where they were on their angle of attack. And and then they called it like the saber dance too. It could easily get into like a big wing rock and kind of a sink, and then it didn't have enough power to overcome it. And a lot of that would happen in the traffic pattern too. So there were quite a few mishaps, and unfortunately, in the last couple of years, there's been more mishaps again with the T-38. So it's again very challenging, and it's been around for a while. So the Air Force has on contract the T-7A Red Hawk to take its place. It's an awesome airplane. I'm very honored to have 5 hours in it, and I can't wait till other people get to fly it and see what a great aircraft it is.
Absolutely, that's very, very cool. So so you go from the T-38, and what came after that?
I went to the F-16, and I trained up at Luke. My first assignment was to Korea, to Kunsan Air Base in the Republic of Korea. I came home after that, and I only had 1 year in Korea, but since I had all this experience flying the T-38, I had a great squadron commander who kept an eye on me, and he had been a FAPE as well, and so made sure that I was good to go, and they upgraded me to flight lead before I left Korea. So after 1 year, came back to Hill Air Force Base, and then we deployed pretty quick, like within probably 9 months after I got back from Korea, deployed to Iraq with the 4th Fighter Squadron.
Is there a big difference when you go from something like a T-38 that's basically designed to teach more than anything, I guess, and then you're going into an F-16, which is, I would assume, designed to fight and therefore not to be difficult on you at the same time as you're doing the rest of your mission? Did that feel like a big transition?
You know what, so I flew T-38A. I think I had 1,100 hours. It's all like the steam gauges. Then I had to transition when I went through an introduction to fighter fundamentals course, which is just a really short course, a couple months long. Mine was like an extra, almost double, because we had to upgrade into the T-38C, and that had the color displays and the electronic displays, and the heads-up display also. And that transition from something I'd known, and like if I want to check the gas, I don't even have to think about it. My eyes go there and it all computes. And now I get into this airplane I have all this time in, and I'm like, I have to like stop and look to read my engine instruments. That was really frustrating. And then like looking through a HUD for the first time too. And so that was really kind of frustrating. And then when I got to the F-16, I mean, it fits like a glove. It like moves when you think about moving. The stick on the F-16 like barely moves around, and so like literally it's just like the pressure of your hand and your fingers that kind of make it move, and the throttle's so responsive, and so it's, the fighters are set up so that flying, the actual act of flying the fighter, it's like walking and breathing, and we don't heart beating, like we don't think about those things, right? So those fighters are made so that the plane is an extension of them, and they can really put their focus into the systems on the aircraft that they need to execute the mission.
Wow. And was that after you completed those courses? Is that when you were deployed to Iraq?
Yeah, after I went through the course at when I graduated out of Luke Air Force Base back then I went to Korea for 1 year, and then I went to Hill, and after Hill was when I deployed over to Iraq, and I was there in 2007, and with a really talented and pretty young group of fighter pilots. And I think we had an awesome squadron commander. We had amazing support staff, and our maintenance was really awesome as well. And we did great. I think everybody really wanted to make sure we did everything right, and we kind of got this great reputation with the guys on the ground whose lives depended on where our bombs went and how well we executed the mission, and we were called on quite a bit more than some of the other squadrons even on base to execute mission. When the things got really bad, they were like, all right, our call sign there was Ninja. We were the 4th Fighter Squadron in the Fujians, but Ninja was our flying call sign, and so they would call a Ninja for whatever they needed. So it was like really rewarding. And like I said, we were pretty young. My flight from taking off from Hill Air Force Base, I flew across the ocean, right? And I didn't volunteer for it because using bladder relief in an F-16 is really tricky, especially for women. And so that was something I was a little bit concerned about, but it's no big deal. Like I figured it out, but I didn't volunteer for it. and I got selected to fly one of the aircraft over to Iraq. And so we took off from Hill Air Force Base, and I think it was like 3 o'clock in the morning or something. It felt like we were flying into the rising sun for like, we took off in the dark, flew in through the sunrise, and we were like in and out of the weather. And my squadron commander was leading the formation, and I was like the next most experienced person. And I had literally been to the tanker like maybe 5 times. And now I have to go to the tanker like 10 times to get to Iraq. And we ended up like hitting some like cloud layers, and the wingmen also were like me, like, you know, we didn't have tankers when I was in Korea because you didn't need it. You were just staying on the peninsula. And so when I got back to Iraq, or when I got back from Iraq at Hill, they were upgrading a bunch of the aircraft. And so I think I went to the tanker like 1 time to rehack my tanker currency. And now I'm flying it for like 10.5 hours into Spain from Hill.
Wow.
And the people on the wing, the other wingmen other than the squadron commander, were very similar to me in experience, if not less.
Isn't that
but
interesting?
We rocked it.
Yeah.
It was awesome. Because we
Was there
had to.
anything that you remember about your missions over there that, I mean, because it sounds like you went straight from, you know, the frying pan into the fire, straight from going and training and learning, but then now it's for real. What did that feel like?
It felt rewarding. I felt like that was my purpose in life, was to be there and do that. Our squadron, like I said, was very successful. It felt really good to be a part of a team. I think I loved checking in with a JTAC, the Joint Terminal Attack Controllers on the ground, who are kind of have an eye on the, you know, the enemy or whatever situation they have going on down there, especially when things were really tense, and you'd kind of check in, and you could almost sometimes like hear them just kind of calm down. Like when you got on, you're like, all right, like we're here, this is our, you know, what we've got, this is how much time we have, this is what we're carrying, you know, as far as ordnance. And it felt good to be able to help them, and to know that they felt some sense of peace and security because we were there, and that we could get the job done for them. And like I said, it was just this huge team effort from, you know, the guys loading the bombs on the aircraft. I worked with the same crew chief quite a bit, and they were awesome. We had guys sitting alert all the time. And I remember like the first time I dropped the bomb, and then I still had to go fly like for 2 more hours after that. You don't just like go home. You still have other things you have to do. And I pulled up to the tanker, and the tanker boomer was like, oh my gosh, like tell me all about it. You know, like we're all part of this. Like, and you get back to like, even, you know, everybody who's working on the ground, and whatever your job is in the Air Force, like, and in the military, like you're all really part of that end result, putting that bomb on the target on time, saving lives of, you know, our US troops and allies. Like that's what's most important, and everybody has a piece of that. You don't have to be the one to hit the pickle button to kind of be the, you know, the hero of that. Everyone has a part of that success.
Do you remember the first time that you actually fired live ordnance in battle?
I do, yeah. There was a nighttime, it was around Baghdad, and there was a meeting of high value targets that were Al Qaeda Iraq, and passing out IEDs, like distributing them. And that was the target that that I dropped on the first time. And they were very like eager to get us to drop, and they really wanted to contain while everybody was there. And there were helicopters too that were like waiting off into the sides, and there were some issues with jamming there. And so when you go to drop a weapon, they give you a run-in heading too, to make sure that there's safety for all the friendlies and everything else around there. And the run-in heading was on the short way of so it really jammed the approach, because the area that we had assigned to us, and it would change all the time, but it was like the long way. So we were on the short way of, like, if it was like a rectangle, instead of being, or sorry, yeah, a rectangle being the long way, we were the short way on it. So it was like kind of jammed, but we came around, and I was like, hey, Ninja 27 in hot. And he goes, cleared. And then it goes, and all this jamming came through. And I'm like, you know, Ninja 27's in, and he doesn't, and I can't hear anything, and I come back around, and he's like, Ninja 27, you know, are your bombs away? And I'm like, no, like you were completely jammed. I only got one word. And he's like, cleared hot, cleared hot, cleared hot. So as we're like coming back around to get on final to drop, and then you watch everything happening, and there were helicopters coming in to make sure that they got you know, that nobody made it out of there. So
Wow.
it was a huge success, that mission. And then that same mission, and this was a daylight one, my wingman and I went up north, and we were looking for hot spots because they had people were digging and planting IEDs on the side of the road. And so we were looking for stuff like that, and you look for hot spots, but it can be anything. Sometimes if someone throws a bag of trash, or, you know, a cow drops dead, or, you know, whatever, something turned over, but sometimes they put bombs in those things, right? So we were looking, and it's like, well, there's a hot spot here, and the JTAC's like, no, I just want to see if there's someone, you know, like actively digging. And as he's saying that, my targeting pad like picks up people actively digging, and I'm like, do you mean like this? He goes, yep. And we see like 3 guys, and they throw shovels into the back of a truck, and one guy goes that way and the truck goes that way. And so I put my wingman on the truck, and I follow this guy going out to the north, and he goes into like a herd of sheep. And I'm like, well, and it's kind of hard to see, and the sun's starting to go down, and you're looking at television, and you're looking at temperature, and so he goes into herd, and I'm like, well, I got him. He kind of went in the same way he came out, no problem. And then he keeps kind of going, and he goes into a soccer game. I'm like, well, that's hard. So he kind of like mingles around with all these people playing soccer, and I was like, I'm like, probably I have him, but I don't know, because it's, you know, kind of tough to keep when there's like a group of people running around in circles. And then, but the person that I thought it was, he went out, and he went out of the game the same direction that he came in. And so my wingman kind of ran out of the airspace over there, and so he kind of came up and joined me, and they were like, hey, we want you to drop on him. And I was like, I don't know for sure. Like we made very certain before we dropped anything that we, no kidding, had the proper target, right? You'd rather let something go than do something, you know, especially if there's like no imminent danger to anybody on the ground right there. So he went into this building, and we're like, all right. And I was like, we got to go home. He's like, all right, you can do a show of force. And we did like this show of force, like right over top, and the Army showed up there later, and sure enough, they found like this whole cache of like weapons and fake passports and all this kind of stuff. So that was on one mission. We stopped a whole bunch of IEDs from being distributed, and we stopped another like trafficking of arms, and I think they were like Syrian passports or something like that. So
Oh my
that was
goodness.
one day, and they're not always all that exciting though. Like many of the missions are literally flying in a right-hand turn, like looking in your targeting pod, and maybe something happens and maybe it doesn't. So it's, you know, it was like a lot of boredom punctuated by moments of excitement, and, you know, like the mission has to get done.
Wow, that is absolutely fascinating. And it really, it's, I don't think I've ever heard before in such a personal way what it's like to be involved in the mission like that. So I definitely appreciate that. Now, of course, after that, you eventually came back home and somehow found your way to the Thunderbirds. What was that path?
Well, so I came back home, and I had decided to transition out from active duty to the reserves, and I also was pregnant with my son right after I came back from Iraq. So I decided to go back to reserves, and that ended up being at Shepherd Air Force Base and back in the T-38 again, which was really nice. Pregnancy, I'm sure you probably have quite a few listeners who had to get back into the cockpit or wanted to get back into a cockpit after pregnancy, but it's tough. And pregnancy, sleep deprivation, brain fog, I don't know, I felt like I was really lacking the cognitive abilities that I had prior to my pregnancy. And getting back in the T-38, which I had flown for so long at the beginning, at the very start of my career, was like therapy. It was so awesome. It's because I knew everything about it, and it was like I felt like there's a little string in the back of my head that you pulled, and all that knowledge came out. Like everything that I knew how to instruct it naturally. It's ingrained in me. Like, give me a T-38 now, I'll teach anybody how to go land that thing. You know, let's go cross country. So it was really nice and very refreshing to get back into it. And I was doing that part-time as a traditional reservist. So I'd switched over to the reserve, and I was thinking about being a stay-at-home mom, and plans change, things change. And so I decided to try to get an active guard reserve job. I was also teaching the simulators as a contract employee. So I would teach sims in a blue flight suit, and then I would pop on a green flight suit and run across the street and go fly with students, which was really fun. And it's Euro NATO there too, so there's a lot of great different cultures and people that you meet there. So it was really wonderful. And then they had in 2004, I can't remember now, but Stroker Gustafson, I had a 4-month-old kid, I think, at home. I had a young kid at home, and the reserve magazine called Citizen Airman showed up at my door, and it was like the middle of the night, and I opened up this magazine, and they were like, there's an article about Stroker Gustafson, who was the first reservist to fly for the Thunderbirds. And I was like, that's it. Like, I want to do that, you know. And when I came home from Iraq, like, we had such a great time, like the squadron, and I was like due for an upgrade, and so the pregnancy, while being wonderful, it was like kind of this weird, completely opposite of everything where I was kind of going with my career. And so it was hard to leave, even though it was such a blessing, and, you know, I would never change anything. So when this kind of is like, oh, there's an opportunity to get back into an F-16, and you know, I always loved the Thunderbirds, and it really impacted me, but it was never necessarily something I wanted to do. I told you about my dad and my grandma and my grandpa, and I always wanted to serve. And if that meant combat, that was something that I was 1,000% ready to do if my country asked me to do that. So now that I've done that, and, you know, I have a story to tell, and it's different than most, and it can help to recruit a different demographic than you normally think of in the military, and especially in the fighter community. I really jumped at the opportunity to go and apply for the Thunderbirds. So I was a reservist, and I applied for the team, and I got selected and went out of Shepherd Air Force Base down to Nellis to become a Thunderbird, the right wing number 3.
And I mean, what is involved in the kind of indoctrination to that world? Because the Thunderbirds demonstration squad is a culture unto itself, isn't it?
Yeah, it sure is. It's a family. It's a really high level of work and skill that's required out of every single member of the team there. It was so funny. Like, I remember when I first got there, the executive officer was like, all right, I'm gonna check you in. And he's like, here's your sunglasses and here's your pen to sign autographs. And I was like, what in the world is this? Like, it's just the weirdest thing. You know, but so you kind of
I
get
didn't know
used
you
to
all
that.
had government issued sunglasses and pens
Oh
to sign
yeah,
on.
everyone had to have the same sunglasses, and then you had one pen to sign, and a different like tribe pen that everybody would carry, so you all look the same, right? Because it's uniform. You're representing, you know, your country, and you're representing precision, not just flying demonstrations, but the precision of the Department of Defense, and the precision that I talked about, how you put, you know, a bomb on bad guys and make sure that you're getting the right people. That's what that represents. But it's a visual representation that we can share with the American public versus, you know, what you do in combat you can't see, right? So it's very important that everything's uniform. But that was kind of funny. But I mean, it's a brutal pace when you get there. We flew 2 times a day, every day, Monday through Friday. And I remember, I think it was February, and I just, in the last like 4 work weeks, I'd flown 40 times. And I went to a meeting at the wing at Nellis Air Force Base, and I saw like one of my buddies, and I was just like sitting there, I'm like so tired, and he's like, yeah, how's it going? And I was like, yeah, it's great. I mean, like, dude, it's just like brutal. And he's like, yeah, I know. He's like, I've only flown 5 times in the last 3 months. And I was like, oh, I'm glad you went first. Like, I have a good problem. 4 times or 40 times in the last month is a lot better than 5 times in, you know, a couple months. So
But you were doing
it was
all of
grueling.
this while being a single mom.
Well, no, I was still married at the time. So and that's kind of a funny story too. So I was the first mom to fly on the team, and I was at Disneyland when I found out. The team called me, and they one by one they went through and said, hey, Blaze, congrats, you know, you're selected for the team and you're going to be the right wing. And they go through all the officers and everybody gives you a congratulations. And so we were walking through Disneyland. So when I take that phone call, you have to talk to like 12 people. I like we were walking through Cinderella's castle and I ducked out of the way of the public and I was like, oh, thanks, you know, like in Cinderella's castle. And my son's in a stroller and my now ex-husband is like pushing him and so they're kind of like waiting for me outside and I come out, I was like, oh my God, this is so great, you know, and we were walking and then all of a sudden like my son starts hollering and he had messed his diaper, like one of those really bad blowouts that comes out the neck. So I was like instantly grounded, right? Like you think you're gonna be some fighter pilot, you know,
from here to here and back to Earth.
Yeah, yeah. So no matter what, I mean, and that's my first priority all the ways is being a mom. But so then going on the road, my son finished potty training while I was training in the F-16 to go back, get back in the F-16 to go to the Thunderbirds. And so it was a kind of nice timing, but when you're like trying to fly a demonstration and then you have a toddler in the room and they're throwing Cheerios everywhere and they don't want to sleep in their own bed, they want to sleep with you, mom, and you're getting feet in your face and, you know, knees in your gut all night long. It's interesting, you know, and they fuss, you know, people would come up to me and be like, oh, can I take my picture with you? And I'm like holding my baby for like the first time and I'm like, sure, okay, you know, so it's like you're trying to balance your job and wanting to be with your kid, but it was really cool. He got to see that, and I was on the team when sequestration grounded us, so I stayed over an extra year in 2014, and I think he was 6 years old then, and it was kind of a blessing because he was a little bit older enough to know like what mom was doing, and when you taxi out and you get to like wave at your kid, and they're like, oh, like, you know, standing there with all the other Thunderbird families and
a 6-year-old gets it, no question.
Yeah, he got it. So there's actually a picture behind me here on the wall. My last air show, he was walking around with grandpa and a news reporter just saw this cute little kid in a flight suit and stopped him for like the man on the street interview for the local news in Las Vegas. And he's like, hey, little boy, what's your favorite part about the air show? And my son's like, well, when my mom flies. And the reporter's like incredulously, he's like, oh, really? What does your mom fly? And he goes, she flies one of those, and pointed out at like the Thunderbirds. So he got it, right? And I'm really lucky he didn't say like, you know, the helicopters or the four-wheelers or the guns or the cotton candy.
Oh my God, what an awesome, you know, kind of like, you know, wrap up to your life story at that point, up to that point, that your son was able to say that and point out like, that's, what do you think my mom's doing? She's the star of the show. She's number 3 in the wing.
Yeah, and it was cute on the news. So he goes, she flies one of those. And then on the news, they cut and they go, for the record, his mom flies one of these. And they go, whoa, and show the Thunderbird pass. And so I did a speaking engagement in Las Vegas, like it was almost a month after that. And at the end of it, the first question was like, was that your son on TV? So they had all seen it. I was like, he's a celebrity.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
Well, so tell us a little bit as we approach the top of the hour and what you're doing these days, because I know that you just keep moving and growing and continuing to be an inspiration.
Well, I started my own business and I love to do inspirational speaking. Really, my primary job right now is to focus on my son. So I felt like I was in most integrity with myself, and I'm very, very blessed that I retired with a full active duty military retirement. I live within my means, which doesn't include me buying an airplane right now, but you know, I live within my means, and I've been able to focus on being there for my son, who moved around quite a bit because of the military service. So we're stationary here for right now. So something that goes great with being a single mom. Even though I do have my ATP, I'm not using it because I can't be gone half the month, and God bless all of our airline pilot friends who do that. But I do inspirational speaking, and I do corporate and leadership coaching and counseling. So I'm excited about that. I'm working on a book. One of the things that I kind of touched on before, but really my favorite job right now that I do is I'm working on the board of directors at the National Lost World War II Museum. It's down in Sweetwater, Texas. It's at Avenger Field, which is the field where the WASP trained themselves. It's hallowed ground. If you haven't been there, you need to go. We have a homecoming experience in April where we have a dinner and a big band dance in the old hangar and airplanes, and everybody kind of dresses up, and it's just like, it's amazing. So I've been able to work with the WASP Museum and work on different projects where we are doing fundraising right now to renovate all of the displays to make them full museum quality displays and preserve a lot of the artifacts that we have too. We have a great archive, and figuring out how we're going to help display that and tell the story of the WASP. And then looking at flying their airplane, hopefully soon. That we have a BT-13, and we're looking to add a T-6 to that, hopefully sometime soon. And I'd love to go out and do the air show thing again. So I've got a lot of irons in the fire for a retired person, but you know, single mom, WASP Museum's probably second. And then I really do love that coaching and connecting and doing the speaking part too.
That's absolutely wonderful. And I know that you're looking for aircraft down there for the WASP Museum. So if anyone has a line on a T-6 Texan to help out the museum, that
yeah, it will tell a wonderful story for the rest of its life and be very well taken care of, for sure.
Absolutely.
So, yeah.
Well, Caroline, thank you so much for your time and your amazingly inspirational story and joining us here on Social Flight Live. I'm absolutely in awe of you, and I appreciate everything that you've done for our country and for aviation as a whole.
Oh, thank you, Jeff. It's been an honor to chat with you.
Absolutely. You have a good evening.
You too.
Take care. And to all of you, thank you again for taking time out of your evening to join us here on Social Flight Live. We'll be back next Tuesday on November 8th with Kenneth Katz talking about the B-1 Bone. He wrote this amazing book on the story of this bomber, the B-1 history from the perspective of technology, of politics, what it really took to get this beautiful aircraft in the air and what happened during its life. And so I'd really encourage you to join us for that show. It's going to be absolutely fascinating. On Tuesday, November 15th, the incomparable Corky Fornoff, the pilot of the BD-5 jet in the James Bond movies, and who really set the stage for aerial coordination in so many movies and stunt flying. He'll be here on the show as well. And then on Tuesday, November 22nd, Avionics will be here talking about some amazing products from them with Shane Woodson. Again, thank you so much for joining us. We're here for you, and I just appreciate everything that you all do to make the general aviation community what it is. Until next time, I wish you all blue skies.